Good.
Since Brian cannot join us, should I record it?
I'm recording now, so I think we're good. And hold on, I'm just going to say welcome to today's webinar. My name is Renee Hobbs, and you are here at the Media Education Lab virtually for our webinar called Media Literacy with Marginalized Communities. And today's session, I think, will be a very great conversation. We have just 60 minutes, and some of the presenters who will be presenting at the International Communication Association Conference in Prague, in the Czech Republic, next month, about a month from today. So joining us here is Markéta Zezelková from the Czech Republic, Yonty Friesem from the United States, Ivana Rotner from Israel, Zoe Wang from the University of Rhode Island, but talking about a Chinese case study, and myself, Renee Hobbs. Before we begin the program, though, I thought it would be useful to go around the room and introduce ourselves to each other, because we're delighted to have some new scholars and researchers and teachers joining us for this session. And so we'll hear from you if you introduce yourselves, and then I'll ask the presenters to briefly introduce yourselves. A. Golden, will you go first?
Sorry, I was muted. I needed to unmute. I'm a faculty member in the communication department at the University of Albany, and I do research in organizational communication and health communication, focusing on minority health disparities, and I've been seeing messages from your organization for quite a while, and so I saw the one today about working with marginalized communities, and I thought that might be something that would be helpful to me in the community-based work that I'm doing to promote underserved women's reproductive health care seeking.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, and we're glad that you're here. Wan Suk, would you introduce yourself to us, please?
Yes, hi. Here, I'm greetings from the University of Lapland in Finland. We call here this town Santa Claus Village, and many of the tourists coming all around the year, especially in the Christmas. But I'm really happy that I can join this conversation today. My name is Won Sok Choi, studying at the International Program for Media Education. And I've been working as a journalist for 5 years in South Korea. And 2 years ago, I came here and continued my study with this faculty. So I've been always reading the Professor Hoff's articles as well as others' studies, but this time I think this is first time to actually talk virtually with the researchers around the world.
Wan Suk, we are delighted that you are here, and welcome to the Media Education Lab. Yonty, I know you've been up to Santa Claus Village, so I'll invite you to introduce yourself next.
Yeah, it was smart to come in February, minus 20, 30 degrees.
Oh, yeah.
Rovaniemi, so yeah. Loved it. I'm Yonty Friesem, Associate Director of the Media Education Lab, Assistant Professor at Columbia College Chicago. Been doing a lot of work with youth media, especially interested because I'm, as our friend Kristen said, recovering high school teacher, teaching kids from marginalized groups, youth media, and feeling that there needs to be more research, more work to help mainly the teachers, I actually think, because the kids are doing great, but the teachers need more tools to understand where they are and what to do, and that's like my interest.
Wonderful. We're glad you're here too. And of course, Yonty, you organized this session, which was accepted as a paper presentation at the International Communication Association. And so we're super grateful to you for bringing this great constellation of scholars together. Next up is Ivana Rotner from Israel. Ivana, can you introduce yourself to the group, please?
Yeah, okay. Now you can hear me, right? Okay. So I'm Ivana Rotner, and I'm from Israel. I'm a teacher, communication and media literacy teacher in high school and in the Gordon College of Education and in Haifa University. And I teach a pre-teachers course in media literacy. And I think I expert in the dialogue between conflict groups in Israel, Jews and Arabs especially. I think that's it.
Wonderful. This is important work, and we're delighted that you're joining us for this session. Next up is Dr. Markéta Zezelková from Charles University in Prague. Markéta, can you introduce yourself, please?
Well, hello, everyone. So as Renee said, I'm assistant professor at Charles University in Prague. I'm sorry if I'm yawning. It's not because I'm bored, it's because it's a bit too late for me. So what I do is primarily focusing on media experience and learning of children, the preschool and primary school. And maybe I'm one of the few here that actually is fully theorist and researcher. What I do is that I research with children and then focus on educational and policy recommendations, but myself, I don't actually work on media literacy interventions with children. And in general, I focus on different cultural or any social context of children's media experience and learning. But today I will speak specifically about the Romani culture.
Wonderful. And next we have Zoe Wang. Zoe Wang from the University of Rhode Island. Zoe, can you introduce yourself to us, please?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Zoe Wang. I am a PhD student at the University of Rhode Island. I'm interested in media literacy, cross-cultural or international communications, and also lately I have been really interested in social media, especially YouTube culture. Yes, so today I'm just gonna introduce a little bit backgrounds as well as the current situation of the media sphere, as well as the media representation of the marginalized community, the so-called migrant workers in China.
Wonderful. So you can imagine what a great conversation we're going to have. One of the things I'd like to call your attention to now, because this is we don't do these kind of webinars all the time, but this time we have a bunch of speakers. They've all got interesting ideas to share. So I want to just call your attention. If you go to the bottom of the screen where the black bar is, you're going to see a chat room. And here's a great place while the speaker is speaking for you to type your message, idea, or question here. So do me a favor, see if you can open up that chat room and see if you can type in a message, because this is called the back channel. And the back channel allows us to reflect on what we're learning and bring our comments and questions from our own disciplinary backgrounds and from our own areas of interest and expertise into the conversation. We're going to, I see Ivana has already done that. Thank you so much. We're going to go in the order that is shown here. So that means, Markéta, we're going to start with you, then followed by Yonty, and then Ivana, and then Zoe. And that, if each of you take about 5 to 7 minutes, we'll have some time to think about the broad themes or disjunctures that exist around these different case studies. And we'll also be able to hear comments and ideas and questions from the participants who are listening today. Does that sound like a plan? Give me a thumbs up if you know what we're going to do now. Woohoo! Okay, Markéta, take it away. And of course, feel free if you'd like to use slides, you can, you know.
Yes, so I will prepare here to share my screen with you. Okay, can you see my screen now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I will go for the presentation that I prepared for the conference, which the talk will probably be longer. So today I will skip few things. I will also measure my own time to make sure I don't take too much time. So my talk will be about Roma children's media life and learning, specifically looking at voice, which is the conference theme in Prague, from cultural and children's rights perspective. Research that I'm going to talk about was funded by the Cost Action, so it was part of the bigger research, but my own small part of it was actually looking at gaining greater understanding of Roma children's media and digital lives and learning. In order to do so, I conducted a small-scale ethnographic and phenomenological research with 6 low-income and 1 lower middle-income Czech families, which had young children and where at least one parent identified themselves as Roma. These families actually had a shared experience of racism, segregation, and ethnic alienation, so that was their common experience. In order to give them multiple opportunities to voice their opinions, I actually had multiple qualitative research methods. I will not mention all of them today because the ones that I'm actually going to focus and draw upon mainly were the interviews with parents, concretely the mothers, and the observations I have done either in children's homes or in the informal educational settings. So this is the full table of the families and the participants. As you can see, the children that were involved, the parents, and also the diversity of different methods that they actually get engaged with, because it was their free choice to see how they want to participate in the research. I will not look at it in the detail, but today, because what we are doing is an approach of a case study approach, I look at the 3 families. I don't know if you see it. It's Alena, Pavlas, and Helena's family. Although normally I focus mainly on media literacy at schools, this is a specific research that I look rather from the media literacy learning at families. Where the media literacy, or how we call it parental mediation, it might be strategic, but we also look at it in my research as something that is a natural, non-strategic parental mediation that actually raises from parents and children's own lived experiences. The important concept that I will draw upon is parental ethnotheories, because like I said, I will look at it from the cultural perspective. So parental ethnotheories is a cultural belief system or cultural models shared by the parents from a cultural group. The ones that I will be looking of the parents' beliefs were actually connected not only to media and technology, which is the most common approach in media literacy research, but actually I will look at parental ethnotheories, also how they thought about children and childhood, education and learning, parenting, and then media and digital technologies in the children's own life. So I will skip this beginning, but I only want to say that the important part of this is that what I actually studied, or was part of the research that emerged from the field itself, was Romani Pen, which is a specific, unique cultural self-definition that Roma people share. And Romani Pen is very difficult to explain or to actually understood. But in general, we think it's the totality of what it means to be Roma. It's something that Roma people would consider as their spirit, the essence of Roma, and so on. It is difficult for us to really link Roma culture because they don't have their own country that we could express it. They also, the tradition is mainly oral, so we don't have written records of it. So Romani Pen is the only tangible things we can actually touch upon when trying to study cultural beliefs of Romani families and their role to media literacy and media education. So I'll just briefly now go through the 3 families' approaches and beliefs that I mentioned. So the first one is Alena's family that has 2 children. And what she actually experienced was that she chose the dominant white majority culture above the Romani Pen. As we can see, for example, from the quote, "My kids don't live that gypsy life. I don't raise them that well, that way, that if you don't want to, you don't have to, and that they can go do whatever they want all day long." So these children actually went to private Waldorf schools. She says they even don't know what gypsy is. She said Romani language is useless for them. She prefers to learn English, German, or Russian. So she literally looked at the children as becomings, and she thought about how to shaping them for the future. When it came to popular media and digital technologies, she really saw them mainly as a relaxation and children's alone time. So she didn't join them in their media and experience. Instead, what she was doing, she focused on print media for education and family bonding. So she was reading them books or actually creating books for themselves. The other family is the second family, which was the Pavlas family. In this family, we could say that they actually chose to live rather according to Romani Pen. So she said that for her it was more important. She would make her very happy if her children finished basic education, but she also continued, she would force them into anything that no. So there was this difference that in Romani Pen she believed that she shouldn't force the children to do anything. So she was acknowledging children's own likes and interests. So she, for example, talked about Frozen and Monster High and how they created the cake for the kid, and that she had the books and the toys and everything. So it was very, she enjoyed it. They liked something. She embraced popular culture and digital media for it, but she actually didn't join it herself. She was not part of that childhood culture, media culture. So the interference that she had, instead that she was, for example, baking the cake, one of the things that she was doing is that it was very pragmatic. So, for example, because they only had one phone, so they had the 10-minute rule, so that they would avoid arguing between the children. So the third family was Helena's. She was also living according to Romani Pen, that she saw as her main value as for the children to be well behaved. That was all she wanted to mainly achieve as a parent. But actually, she was very involved in her children's lives and their own likes and interests. So for that reason, she was also very involved in their media life. She was reading 2 books to them, but not because she thought it's good for their future, but because the children simply wanted it. She was also very interested in the internet because she said that the kid can live and learn anything they want there. But what she struggled with was actually that they didn't have money to have computer and the internet. So she was hoping for the her mother would buy the internet for the household. That was the family that the children were actually also very interested themselves in learning, and what they struggled with was also the access to good education. So there are 2 slides that now have conclusions why I was saying what I was saying. So one of the things that I find interesting, that voicing parents' cultural beliefs about child learning and parenting within media literature, their research and practice should be important. Because if we look back at the cases that I was talking, then Alena saw her children primarily as becoming. She was trying to shape them to something futuristic, as is very common in the dominant white culture, at least in the Czech Republic. While Pavla and Helena saw children mainly as beings, and they were much more interested in their immediate lives with media and technology. So Alena was future-oriented, while Pavla and Helena looked more for the present as important on its own right. So what we were looking at is that actually these motivations that the parents had in these Romani families were a bit more complicated and complex than just this simplified dualistic differentiation between protection and empowerment. So we actually suggest, or I suggest in my research, that we have to understand this media literacy and parental mediation and families in relation to a number of contextual factors, including desire to be a good parent, and acknowledge that to be a good parent actually means different things in different cultures. I mean, indeed, even in different families. And the second thing that I would like to point out, since we have about voicing marginalized children's voices, is that the integrational rhetoric in media literacy theory, research and practice focus on marginalized communities should not be the dominant voice, because actually if we'll think about Elena's case, she faced the decision of choosing between the dominant and her own culture, and from the cultural rights perspective, this should not be happening. And in the case of the Romani people, we see that there is still really a thin borderline between assimilation and integration. So what we should try is to firstly understand and support the plurality of voices with their own needs and motivation before suggesting an instructional development of media literacy interventions. So just to conclude, what I was trying to briefly say in this presentation was that to highlight the potential relevance of parental ethno-theories, the parental mediation approaches, motivations, and form, which should be considered as relevant to media literacy, aiming to empower the marginalized voices. And also, secondly, I wanted to question and challenge the integration of media literacy and empowerment discourse, which might in reality have a different impact on marginalized parents and their children than intended by the majority society, and us researchers included, because like I said, children should have right to their own culture. Thank you.
Wow. Okay, Marketa, how absolutely fascinating. At this point, if you have comments or questions, I'm going to invite you to I'm going to invite you to put them into the chat room. You've given us a lot to think about the idea of the cultural beliefs about parenting, learning, media, and technology affecting what kind of media literacy might happen in the home. And you've helped us understand how that might vary across cultures and within cultures too. Thanks very much for that. Okay, Yonty, you're up next. Tell us a little bit about your case study and what findings you want to showcase from that.
So I'm going to share my screen, and before that, I'm just going to put 3 links in the chat so that people can see what I'm going to talk about. Here we go. So the reason that we wanted this panel was that there have been like a lot of things that have been written about why media literacy should work with marginalized groups and why it is like important, but at the same time, we as educators find it really challenging. And when we talked as colleagues together, like what are those challenges, we saw that there are different challenges, but also similarities. And that's part of what we're trying to see here. Different contexts, different audiences, different parts of the world. But the similar thing is we're trying to bring media literacy, but at the same time, our target audience for this is groups who have been silenced. And how do we use what the research says that media literacy helps for agency? And does it really help? And do we have like best practices for it? So I'm going to show you a very small case study that happened last year in Rhode Island as part of this project called Give Me 5. And you have here the website of Give Me 5. One part of Give Me 5 is to do a workshop that is a 5 to 6 hour workshop that students are coming to one place. They don't know each other, and for 5 to 6 hours, they learn the basics of filmmaking and to create a 1 minute long video. So this project has been going on for 8 years. We've been part of it. You can see on the website a lot of resources. But what changed last year was that we got a grant to bring students from Rhode Island School for the Deaf. And those students didn't have any experience working with filmmaking, which was really great. And I followed the instructor, Alex, who knows the sign language, and he's a filmmaker, to see how it works. And it was amazing being the only person who didn't speak sign language in the room and being the person who was the outsider and kind of trying to understand the culture. So Alex started actually with the roles, who wants to be what, and having a specific kind of responsibility of, I want to be the actor, I want to be the camera person. Didn't talk about the film, didn't talk about what's going to happen. First of all, what do you want to do, and make a commitment, which is very interesting as an approach to start teaching it. Then they had a whole negotiation of like, I don't know, 15 minutes about what's the name of the group. So creating like a group agreement about what's the name, and eventually they decided on the rooster, which is the cameo of the school. And only then they started to talk about narrative, when each one was offering their like take, and Alex trying to combine everything together and create some kind of a coherent narrative, when eventually when they voted, they decided to do a superhero story. Now, obviously, in a minute, doing a superhero story would be kind of challenging. So what they decided to do is all the superheroes are joining like the call to come together and help the cause of showcasing the strength of deaf culture. So then what happened was that, as you can see here from what I took on the board, there were the different ideas of what to do and how to do. And then Alex explained how to do the storyboard, but then the storyboard was per character. So each person took responsibility for their own character and their special skills that they have, and created a storyboard. As you can see here, each one was like writing it, and what is your character was the first thing in the morning, how do you meet the others, and that's the way with like 3 to 4 squares they created their own storyboard. Then they started to explore like the camera, how to use the camera, to do rehearsal, how they're gonna play. And then they went out and actually filmed it. Alex took a drone to make it like really cool for them. And for the last shot of the movie, and I put the link of the movie in the chat if you want to see, it's the second one. They used like a drone to film it. Most of the time it was the students who filmed it, but just for the drone, it was Alex who was like monitoring it, and they were very excited about it because it was so cool, obviously. And then they went into the editing, which was a very different approach to editing, thinking that they cannot hear what's going on, they can just see. Was that Alex showed them very quickly how to do editing using Premiere, which was fascinating for me, how quickly they could learn a software that took me years to master. And then they were divided into 4 computers. Each computer had 2 people, and they did their own version. And once they show each version, Alex combined all those ideas and made like one version that will be screened. Then the movie was screened. And again, we don't have time, but you have the link to look at the video. And they received feedback from the other group. So I need to mention that at the same time that this group that was very homogenic from the part of like being deaf, all the other groups, the other 4 groups, were kids from Rhode Island who were combined in the usual way that it has been done for 8 years. And somewhat they were like communicating, but the big communication was in the last session when they received feedback. So the kids from the Rhode Island School of Deaf gave feedback to the hearing kids, and the hearing kids gave feedback to the movie that they did. And it was very elaborate and a lot of positive feedback that was really great, and an amazing experience for both culture, if I can call it that way. So they did their movie. I'm just going to show like an extra of it. So we can see each one of the people meeting, and Alex added subtitles. And then at the end, when they're meeting each other, we have like the drone video to kind of like see how all of them coming together and showing their powers. So it's a very simple video. It's far from being sophisticated, but to think that that was their first time creating a video, that was super remarkable, and getting the positive feedback was also very helpful for them. Then interestingly enough, 2 weeks later, we came to their school and did again the same 5 hours, but this time it was just in their own school. Most of the students that were 2 weeks before learning for the first time, this time they chose to do a horror movie, and that's the third link that you have in the chat. And it was interesting that they used their space, that they felt comfortable. It was not a different space, and it was between themselves. They knew already who is going to do what, and it went much quicker, and the result was much more professional. I'll show you again just a short snippet out of like the video. So this is the school kind of again from a drone shot. And as I said, that's the cameo of the school.
Haunted, Jonathan, that's the idea, huh?
What?
The school is haunted, that's the idea, right?
Yes. And so just to get to the, like, So it's haunted, and then like the sorcerer become whatever, this chicken bird, something like.
I get it. So the rooster is the evil rooster.
Kind of, yeah. So it was really interesting to do a focus group, and I don't have all the information now. We don't have the time, but 5 questions that raise, and I would love to get feedback at the end of like our session, was the students definitely prefer to be at their schools. And when I asked if they want to work with hearing people, they said no, they prefer to work with their own like friends from the deaf culture, which for me was amazing because I'm all the time trying to be inclusive and feeling, oh, we need to be inclusive, but oh, actually, you know what? They don't want to be inclusive. So that was kind of an interesting feedback. Who was the target audience of the video? Was it only the kids that were doing it for their parents? If we're talking about agency, do we want to broaden that? Do they think about it? Do they want to go beyond the school walls? What actually the students learn? So yes, they learn the technical skills, but what are the skills they learn that we're advocating for all the time for media literacy? And the 2 big, large questions are, what are the processes that support the culture of deaf that can like create a production? Because we have hearing issues that I remember in Israel that I had issues when I tried to combine hearing people and deaf people working together. It really was challenging. And then for me really is, can we actually bring, and how intercultural encounter doing media production? So 2 different cultures that would work together, and is it even something that both cultures are interested in and not opposing that? So that's kind of the overview of that project.
Wow, what a fascinating example of a marginalized group that we don't think of when we think about media production, Yonty, and what a fascinating pedagogical practice this this case study illustrates. There might be lessons from this pedagogical practice that could apply in other learning contexts. So I'm absolutely fascinated about that. Okay, so let me just share my screen with you, and we'll talk about, if you have questions or comments, please use the chat room to share those ideas, because we'll have time for discussion at the end. But next up is Ivana Rotner from Israel. Ivana, do you have slides? Do you want to share your slides with us? Or are you just going to talk without slides? So we need you to turn your microphone on because we can't hear you now.
Now you can hear me.
Now we can hear you.
Okay, so I just said that my slides are not so sophisticated, but we'll manage with what we have, right? Just a sec. Where is it? Maybe this is it. Try and put this away. And yeah, this is mine, I guess. Just a sec. Wait, here we are. Yeah, now you can see it. Can you see it? No, you
Yes, we can.
do I need to, I'll just present it. Here we are.
Looks beautiful.
Okay, no. Okay, so I want to, maybe tell everyone where am I? Okay, so this is Israel, and I'm actually talking about the marginalized group I'm talking about is preschool teachers, pre-prepare, how to call them? Students who are preparing to be teachers, right? Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. And I'm talking about the Arab minority in Israel. And when I say Israel, I'm talking about this yellow part of what you see over here on the map, right? So, so I'm talking about the 20% Arabs that live in Israel, and they study in Hebrew-speaking colleges, and they study in Hebrew. And we have to remember that their main language is Arabic. So actually, Hebrew and English, or maybe Hebrew would be their third language because English is their second one. So I'm really talking about a challenge for these students who are preparing to be teachers in their Arab schools, and they are taught and they're studying in Hebrew. Okay, so that's a challenge. I don't know why I can't go down. Why can't I go down? Something is, I can't move. Oh, okay, right. So I want to share with you Independence Day. That was like 2 days ago. So I'm talking about these two narratives and what's the background of these students. So this is one of our Arab teachers, and he's celebrating, or not celebrating. Yeah, he's in this Nakba Day parade that's talking about the disaster of the Palestinians in the same day of Independence Day of Israel. So when I'm talking about Arab students being challenged in the educational system, this is like an example, because they really can't talk about their narrative. They can't really express this narrative of their historical disaster. And when it comes to class or to school, so they will prefer talking about talking about just popular culture, and they won't talk about political context. They'll avoid it, and um, they'll try not to critic Israeli government or the Israeli occupation, of course, where Israeli Jewish students would do in class. And pre-service teachers would prefer focusing on other issues like gender and, as I said, clips or other popular culture, not national identity. This is an example of a Lebanese video clip. Haifa Wahabi, she's like an Arab Muslim singer, and she's an example of one of the students' lessons where they did in the class of bringing into the class, or bringing a challenge of how do Muslim women are represented in video clips. Of course, it annoys a lot of the religious qadis and religious people in her culture, but when the students bring it into the class, it's one of their personal debate in their culture and in their society, so they can talk about it in class, and this is how they avoid political issues. I'll maybe leave the link afterwards in the chat. So students will use social media for social connection, but they won't read news, and they won't definitely talk about politics in the class. And when we talk about what do you do with your social media, so they would say that they use Facebook or Instagram, and they'll as I said, use it for social connections and not for reading news. And politics is one of the classes that I teach and I talk about. And the other day it was, or maybe I'll give this example. So they don't only talk about, they don't only don't talk about politics, but also when they do films, okay, some of their products, they deal with personal narratives, and they won't, go to national narratives in that sense. I want to give you an example of the other day. when we were talking in this journalism class, and I was asking what would be the first page of the news, the next day. And I asked the Jewish kids to give all sorts of ideas, and then we assumed that the Arab kids would, not kids, sorry, students, would give the same assumptions, like what's happening in Gaza and what's happening in in Syria and what's happening just around the Arab world, because as you know, we don't live in a very, we live in a conflict zone. So and I suppose it's something that they mind, but we opened, or one of the students opened this website, the PanNet website, and it's a very, it used to be a newspaper. It's not a newspaper anymore. It's only, on the net. So you'll see over there local news, and yes, they'll deal with crime and with health matters and with education matters, but in their, in their Arab villages, and not across the country. And they won't deal with anything doing with Israel or with any critics about Israel. And this is an example of the Hebrew newspaper, where definitely you'll have national news, and you'll definitely have critical, you'll have a critical perspective on the government. This is not a very critical newspaper, but that's what you would find in the Hebrew newspaper. This is one of the things that Hebrew newspaper is accused of, being very liberal and very critical about the government. And this is how it's supposed to be in a democratic country, right? But Arab students don't really absorb this this way of thinking, or at least they don't bring these critics into the class, into the Hebrew-speaking class. So I guess they would be critical amongst themselves. And since I don't speak Arabic, so I don't know if that's what they do amongst themselves. And maybe if I want to, broaden the research, I need to have an Arab-speaking colleague who do the research together with me among the Arab students studying in a Hebrew class, in a Hebrew-speaking class. So I think I want to ask, I want to, connect to what Yonty was asking. Do they really want to integrate, Jews and Arabs together? That's what I did in my, dissertation. I brought Jewish and Arab kids to meet and to do movies together. And I'm, thinking, do they really want to study together? How do they feel when they study in different languages, and they have this challenge in Hebrew? And how do they feel when they can't really criticize the government, who's definitely treating them as, well, maybe what I'm saying over here, as second-class citizens, okay? And when they don't study in their own language, they can't bring their own culture and their own narrative into the classroom. And if they do, we'd have, disputes in class. And this is something that, as a minority, they don't really want to, have in the class. And I think that's it. Okay.
Wonderful. Ivana, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on that. I think it's a really intriguing set of ideas about the avoidance of critical perspectives and the strategic thinking that might be behind that. Next up, we're going to hear from Zoe Wang. Zoe, I'm going to ask you to start your video, and we'll hear from you for about 5 to 7 minutes, and then we'll talk over what we're experiencing.
Renee, how do I get out of how do I go back to?
I think I have just taken your power away.
Thank you.
I'm now going to stop sharing so Zoe can begin her talk.
Okay. So I'm just gonna share my screen, I guess. Here.
I'm seeing some fascinating themes emerging already from these presentations, Yonty. I think you must have had that planned.
Okay, can everyone see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay. Just, okay, hi everyone. My name is Zoe Wong. I'm a PhD student at the University of Rhode Island. Today I'm going to be introducing some of the themes and backgrounds of the media representations on the China's marginalized community, the so-called migrant workers. Okay. Okay. Did my screen freeze? Sorry. Uh-oh.
Okay, so let's see if we can find a way to move those slides forward, huh?
Okay. Did my screen freeze? Okay. Okay.
There we go.
Oops. Okay. Just a little background about how this kind of social phenomenon has appeared. So since the late 1970s and early 1980s, China has released this kind of economic reform policy, so-called open policy. So they released a series of policies that encourage cities or especially the coastal area to develop faster. And based on that kind of background policy, there's a significant increase of migration between the very agricultural countryside and the remote area of in China to the industrialized urban area. So basically, urban areas needs more workers, while the farmers in the rural areas wants to kind of explore more opportunities for their kind of economic status change. And okay. And because of that kind of phenomenon, there has been a group of people that has never appeared before. It's called migrant workers. The rural migrant workers are those who, with a rural household registration, who are employed in who migrate to urban areas and were employed in urban workplace. Because they are not from the urban areas, so they don't have a household registration in the urban areas. So they're not considered the residents of the urban areas. Okay. And these group of people has grown a very large population throughout the years, as we can see. So there's about 100 million has grown from 2010 to 2016. And as I said before, because the hukou system in China that has limited a lot of benefits and a lot of it has restricted the migrant workers speak out for themselves or fighting for their rights. So as we can see, the hukou system designates a resident status as being either rural or urban based on their registration birthplace. So but this means a migrant worker from the countryside is not entitled to public service in the big cities such as Shanghai, Beijing, or the other big cities in the coastal areas. So because of the conflicts between their rights as a resident in the cities or the urban areas, and the actual work they're doing and actual population that was existing in the urban areas, there are a lot of issues that has risen during this movement. So for example, one of the biggest issues is the left behind children. So a lot of migrant workers, they move to the big cities. However, their children do not have the support or the rights to have education in the big cities. Therefore, they cannot see their children, they cannot parenting their children. So the growth of the children causes psychological, social, cultural issues among this generation. In addition to the left behind children, there are living conditions about those migrant workers in urban China. There are, healthier issues because of the hukou system. They do not have the healthcare that was distributed from the urban area, and a lot of times the employers kind of discriminate those migrant workers, and they kind of limitate their wages, and also a big issue of social justice are among this group of people. Just very quickly, I provided a little bit of background of those situations of this group of people, as well as the kind of issues that has risen from in like 3 decades. However, the media, looking at the media sphere, the media representations of those group of people has not been very well developed. So in the kind of first decades of this migration, we're looking at the first wave of migration in 1989. Starting back then, there are more and more journalistic and investigative reporting that featuring how to understand this group of people, and how what are their lives exactly like. Those topics were appearing in journalistics or investigating report. Early mainstream, like entertainment media representation, however, features women migrant workers. However, the issues they were addressing are basically cultural changes or ethical issues, or more romantic kind of theme was represented in those presentations. Since 2010, there have been less and less those kind of representations about those group of people. There are few representations that are addressing migrant workers returning home, rather than kind of reviewing their life and the issues that were actually happening in the society. Okay. And another very kind of predominant theme is that media representation that actually reveals very sensitive issues usually goes underground or go overseas. As we can see, some of the filmmakers that has made some of those movies or documentaries were actually produced or released in the United States or other countries. and those filmmakers usually were banned in the Chinese media market. Sorry. Another theme that is kind of emerging is that because of the information and communication technology has boomed in China in the recent decades, and China has developed a very basic, the very kind of free use, convenient social media of their own. So, and also there are increasing number of ownership of mobile phones and devices. So the users of social media actually among migrant workers in cities or urban areas has been increasing, and they're and because they are mostly away from their family and children, so they most likely would use mobile phones or other devices to communicate. And with that trend, younger generations of migrant workers is able to access information and learn about their own rights. And in addition to that, they're using social media to communicate with each other, and has promoted this kind of activist theme among social workers to kind of fight for their right. Although they're still in a very kind of pre-developing area stage, but it is a kind of emerging theme that has appeared in this topic. And just as I talked about those kind of issues and representations, and just like a few kind of consideration that how we should understand this and how we should address this. And I want to ask the question, how should we address this? Because of the social government control and censorship, and the medium system in China is very unique. Therefore, the media representations are often restricted and censored by the government, and media representations tend to kind of promote the kind of harmonized society, rather than actually revealing very sensitive issues that might potentially cause conflicts or chaos. And also the framing of the media representation, there's a bunch of series about how media was framed. For example, journalistic or the mainstream media producers usually have a kind of a gap from those migrant workers, and the very in-depth issues usually are not discovered, or is hard to uncover those issues and to present them in the media. Also, with this kind of media environment in China, how are we gonna address these issues with a more with the general audience, and for example, perhaps using media literacy to kind of analyze those representations and further address these issues in society.
Wow. Zoe, thank you so much for sharing that great presentation. So now I'm going to open the floor for comments and conversation. It is 5 o'clock, but I feel like we need 15 minutes at least to pull together the strands across these themes. It's clear that we're talking a lot about questions about how critical can you be? It's clear that we're talking about differences within cultures and across cultures when it comes to parenting and when it comes to connections between deaf and hearing students. It's really interesting to think about how media representations might influence the attitudes and perspectives that we see in these different presentations. So I open the floor to comments and questions from all the teams.
I would look at the chat because we have like different, like just what Marketa just wrote and Wonsuk as well. So I would look at those, like looking at the cross kind of understanding between, so Marketa, maybe you take from what you wrote and kind of try to see the, how can we connect those questions from your population that is also like maybe see themselves as migration or not, with what Zoe was introducing and with the population that Ivana is talking about.
Sorry, I'm just looking for my comments because I think I made 2 or 3, but I cannot find them now. So if I start with the last one, which was mainly connected to Zoe, that I found very interesting, the part when she talks about children self-learning about their rights, because I think that's one of the things that I was more keen in my research, and still haven't figured out how this could be done, but actually for Romani children to learn their own rights, I think it would be very interesting in using media literacy for that. But I was just wondering if maybe in China it was possible because there was actually no parental involvement. That actually the bad thing actually might have been some beneficial in that point of view, that the children were very free to explore and they have a good motivation to actually do so, which still in Romani culture communities in the Czech Republic, the parents and the grandparents are still very powerful element that probably wouldn't allow such a freedom of exploration. So it was my thing that I was just wondering if we could translate, if we could actually learn from something from China to apply in other cultural settings. The other thing that I found interesting was when Yonty was talking, and I'm sorry about Elana, about the Israeli case. In my case, that actually we always have this hopes for media literacy to actually empower voices and bring like intercultural dialogue. And I don't mean necessarily between like Romani and white culture, but any, for example, deaf culture and hearing culture, or Jewish and Arab cultures and so on. That actually we see that we have these hopes, but maybe actually people, the marginalized communities, are not very interested in this intercultural dialogue anymore, probably because of the past and all the other contextual national and policies and everything that's happening around, that they actually don't want to engage. And so I think that very often the media literacy just is having these hopes, but actually we have to go much more deep and to greater understanding and actually much back before we can use media literacy for this intercultural experience, or for children's exploring their own rights and for voicing their opinions, and actually the social identity or national identity, which they already find difficult to define because of all the environment. So just that I think in this case, media literacy on its own just has too many contextual things that has to be dealt with.
Wow, that is fascinating, and I really appreciate that good synthesis, Marketa. Other perspectives, comments, questions? How does the ideas that we learned about today relate to your work and your interests?
So I wanna also respond. Also, I'll start with Zoe because I came now from this media literacy conference in Lisbon, and there was a presentation over there about Eritrean and Syrian migrants in Europe, and we have them also in Israel. Not Syrian, but we have Eritrean. And social media is really the connection to home, and usually marginalized groups want to go home. So it's connected also to what I said about the Arab students, and also what Yonty said about the deaf kids. People like to be within their own culture. It doesn't mean that they don't want to be part of the main, main culture. They want to integrate, but they want to keep their own, comfort zone. I would call it, especially with maybe deaf kids, and that's a debate within the deaf culture. Like, should we teach them language, sign language? should they learn to read, lips? Should they do the operation? I don't know how to call it in English. Okay, so I think Yonty had this challenge of being the only hearing person in a deaf group, and that's very interesting. Having like movies made in sign language, and the subtitles would be for hearing people and not for the deaf people. Like think about it that way. So yeah, and I have to say that also with migrants, and that's a big thing going on today, and maybe I want to put it in two perspectives. Marketa and Zoe were talking about migrants. Even if Zoe's talking about working migrants, it's still migrants, right? Leave home, leave their kids, leave their families, come over. So within the Roma population or culture, they don't leave their families, but it's a debate of how much you want them to integrate into the general culture. So I think for the kids, it's up to the kids to decide in the end, and that's one thing. And should I stop? Did you do that to me? No. Okay. I was thinking that you referred to me.
Actually, Ivana, I think that was a really good point about we are sort of recognizing the extent whether or not connecting across cultural groups is perceived as desirable. But I invite Kamara, A. Golden, Wansuk, Hameen, MacBook. We are happy and interested in hearing about how these ideas about media literacy in marginalized communities relate to your interests and your practice. Who'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I can maybe share some of the ideas I learned here in Finland. Like in this Lapland area, the northern Finnish area, and as well as Norwegian and Swedish Lapland, there are marginalized group, Sami people. So they are like specific groups of the people in the society who is not perfectly integrated into Finnish society at the moment. So one of the big topic in this media literacy, I guess, is to bring them into the discussions using the media, and that's also one of the goal in our university to develop more idea. And as Professor Hope said, that media, like camera, video, podcast, or stop motion animations, all those small media skills are now used for bringing them to deal with their marginalizations. So that's why I just put my idea that for marginalized group, because their weakness in my case, one of their weakness was found from the Finnish teachers. They don't know how to use smartphones. They don't know how to use internet. So that's their kind of weakness. But on the other side, because they have the lacking point, the teachers wants to bring the different media skills to their education or their daily life, so they can be integrated into the society. So that's kind of one idea. I think if I find some kind of similarity from the different groups in China, Israel, and Czech, as well as in US.
Thanks for sharing. Other comments, questions? How does the question of media literacy in marginalized communities relate to your areas of expertise and interest in practice? A. Golden.
Well, I thought all of these presentations were very interesting and inspiring. And one of the issues that this project that I've been working on for several years now is focused on is how to make better connections between community residents and the health and human service organizations that are set up to serve the community. And we've been exploring various ways that the voices of the community members and their experiences of receiving services in the community might be better heard by the health and human service organizations in the community. So we had, as one step in this, we had started doing something that we called the Women's Voices Project, where we use essentially photo elicitation to have discussions about barriers to healthcare seeking in the community, and also resources that are available. And so we have the discussions in the community, and then we record them, but really just, I don't mean we record them on video, but we record them, just record the comments. In fact, you can probably see behind me a flip chart in the disarray of my office here that's actually from one of those meetings. And so, you know, when someone was talking about empowering marginalized voices, I think it was Marquetta, that you know, I was thinking how there may be an application of something like this that would be a more powerful way of communicating, rather than a written summary of one of these meetings, to the health and human service providers in the community that I work in.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point of connection, and certainly that idea of how media amplifies voices, allows perspectives to be heard. Zoe, what was interesting about your presentation was the migrant workers in China are already using social media to communicate with their families and as a little bit of activism, but in the mass media, their stories are not told as much. So I was absolutely intrigued by that, as I was, Ivana, with your talk about how studiously the pre-service Arab Israeli teachers avoid referencing political conflict. Do you think this has to do with the particular, it's kind of like, in a way, the Arab Israeli people might be a lot like the Roma in a way, right? Is it because they're aware of their vulnerable, marginal status that it's too dangerous to bring up these issues? The Jewish kids can bring it up because they're the privileged class, but the Arab Israeli kids, they're aware of their vulnerabilities. Is that why they avoid looking at critical perspectives on news and politics?
And they would be blamed for, you know, going against the country. It's not their country. I mean, it is their country, but, you know, like, this is what they are, you know, like you.
That's the point.
Yeah. I mean, there's also the national conflict. It's a cultural conflict. It's a national conflict. It's a religious conflict. It's, you know, they don't speak the same language, a language conflict, you know, and it's, wow, thinking about that. It's hard to be an Arab Israeli in Israel, yes.
Right. And so maybe in the presence of all those conflicts, then silence or avoiding is actually like a survival strategy.
Kind of, but that's, you know, I think that a real tool is using social media in their language, and then, you know, keeping the voice, keeping the discourse within them, and then they can say whatever, because they have enough audience around the Middle East, and they don't need the Hebrew speaking, you know, people to to listen to them, I guess. You know? It's like they have 300 channels on TV and we have like 3, okay? And they have, so yes, we think we are the center of the world, but no, we aren't. So, you know.
Fascinating. So we're going to have to wrap up in just a minute. But
so one thing I want to reflect is that I've been learning like about the Kingian nonviolence and looking how the social right movement from the 60s is like the path that every time we think about activism, that's where we refer to, or South Africa as a successful like activism. But in a time that we have social media, digital age, when globalization is actually being reversed in a way and more localization, but using social media, maybe activism is starting to look a little bit differently. If you look at Black Lives Matters kind of like a way, and maybe as media educator, we need to shift our mind from the social right movement from the 60s as a model of you create your thing to have like this, like the whole mainstream media, like King did, to bring the media into the conflict to show what happens. Maybe we need to think about different strategies that are working, that actually the marginalized people themselves have their own way of doing it, that we're not exactly listening when we're doing critical media literacy.
What an interesting point of view. And that's making me think about Marketta's beautiful what did you call it? Ethno theory. Looking closely within the community to identify their values and their worldview as being a part of that. Now, I see that we have some new faces have joined our really cool discussion. We can't end this session without hearing from each of you. Simply because you've joined in our conversation today, you are now colleagues, and we want to meet you. So I see Kamara, I see Pamela, I see Hameen, and I see Pamela. I see 2 Pamelas, Hameen and Kamara. Will you please introduce yourself to us a little bit? Tell us about your work and your interests in media literacy and marginalized community. Kamara, will you go first, please?
Oh, okay, thank you. Well, I'm not sure if you can hear me clearly. I'm a student at the University of Lapland, just like one chunk. He introduced me to the action of media, politics, and business. This is my interest, and I'm very much interested in this particular episode because it deals with one of my course work, which deals with marginalization of some groups. And our teacher gave us an assignment, and I choose a book which deals with the violence in Colombia, the factions that have been going for quite a long time. And as the group discussed about marginalized groups, I was thinking and trying to reflect on the empowerment aspect of what has been happening in those areas where the community cannot talk about what is happening, but they have been using the media in a very interesting manner. And that's why I was just listening and trying to correlate these two different circumstances. But it is very, very interesting, and I hope that I would continue to learn a lot from this webinar.
Wonderful. We are delighted that you have joined us, and obviously the graduate students of the University of Lapland, you are really a great treasure, and we know you've stayed up very late for this meeting as well. Let's hear from Pamela and Pamela. Will you introduce yourselves to us, please? That's you, Pam P. Uh-oh. What? I can't hear you.
Okay. Hi.
Hi.
Okay. Hi. So I am Pamela Pereira, and I live in New Mexico. I've been here for 20 years. I'm originally from Bolivia, from South America. And there are similarities between the two places, in that this is a place where there has been conquest, right? The conquistadores came in the 1500s. So we're living in here in New Mexico, which is part of the United States, and we're in the Southwest. And we're living in a place that has a lot of Native American pueblos, and one of the highest numbers of Native American pueblos. And so there are the Native American community. We have, we're right north of Mexico, so a lot of people from Mexico. We have the Hispanics from New Mexico that have been here for a long time, that it's like a blend of, so they're old. A lot of people have also blended between the Native Americans and the Hispanics. And lower income, we're one of the poorest states, if not maybe, well, we're one of the poorest states, and rural. So all these communities are marginalized in New Mexico, right? So the whole state is really a marginalized state is what we're working with.
Well, we are delighted that you've joined us, and your interest in doing media literacy in New Mexico means this topic is really relevant to you. Pamela Stager, will you introduce yourself to us, please?
Yes, I'm Pamela. When I was in Costa Rica, I also was Pamela. I guess I got interested in media literacy and its role with marginalized communities when I first started studying it. And I was working as a prevention specialist, and I think my own take on gender and how gender was represented was a big thing, but I was also working with middle and high school students and really encouraging them to get their voices out, which was pretty new back in the day. But when I was directing the Media Smart project in the Providence school system, I noticed, casual research that the kids with educational challenges, when they put earphones on to be the audio engineer and were involved in a video production activity, their ADD flew out the window, like they were just there. And I realized that there was something to the focus and the quiet and the rules of a production studio that really suited those kids really well. And then I went to Costa Rica for graduate work, and there, we studied. I mean, it was the University of Peace, and we studied the role of media in conflict areas, both for ill and for good. And that was really fascinating. So I'm so sorry I got lost in garden time and I couldn't get here earlier. I'm sorry I missed it. Are you recording, hopefully?
We are recording, Pam, and let me just say it's been an absolute treat. I think this is our most diverse. We have European scholars here. We have Latin American scholars here. We have a really diverse and interesting array of folks. Thank you so much for joining us. Hameen, before we go, I give you the opportunity to introduce yourself to us and tell us about your interest in marginalized communities.
Well, hello, could you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, all right. So actually, you can call me Haha, and I'm from Vietnam, but currently I'm studying media education in University of Lapland. And actually, my field is more about using media in education. But recently, when I have a class with a Swiss media educator, and also from today, when I heard about in Israel, when like children, political topics is quite sensitive at school, and it's related a lot back in Vietnam. Like even though we do not have any conflicts within the countries, but bringing politics inside the classroom is something really sensitive. And we kind of like afraid to do it because nowadays like students all the time have the smartphone, so they can record, they can just well, you know, like when you say something like the whole thing, but then they just cut it into like small pieces and they put on the internet. So you kind of like won't be in big trouble in that way. So like bringing politics is something really sensitive. So I'm quite related to that. And I'm really like wondering, because media, like critical media in Vietnam is not like, we are not taught at universities. And we kind of like are afraid of bringing that topics to talk about, like even in public or in social media. So I'm kind of like wondering, how could we like teach, I mean, critical media at school? And it's still like a lot of things in my mind now at the moment for it.
We're delighted that you have joined us. This is a topic of great interest to us. We're going to be at the International Communication Association in Prague in 1 month talking more about this. We'll be in Hong Kong at the Hong Kong Media Literacy Conference in November. Ivana, you just got back from the International Media Literacy Research Conference in Lisbon. This is a global community of scholars, and you are part of that. So thank you so much for joining us. Yonty, thank you for organizing this. Let's give all of the presenters and the panels a round of applause. Yes, there you go. Okay, so I just wanted to call your attention to just one thing before I let you go. I can't let you go without me suggesting one thing. You guys want to come back, right? You do. You want to come back, and here's why. Because look what's happening at the media. Let's see what's happening at the Media Education Lab in just one a little bit. Learn with us. Check out our webinars and online learning. Coming up in just a week, next Monday, is a great session called Media Literacy in Relation to Policy, Standards, and Assessment in the Personalized Learning Era, featuring Mike Rob Greco, a director of curriculum and technology and a media literacy educator and activist himself. And then just a couple Mondays after that, Ellen Reynolds is joining us for a talk on children's documentaries. So for all those reasons, I hope that you join us again next time. And thanks very much for being part of the community. All right, bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.